So we're now standing inside of the ruins of St. Nicholas Church. This used to be one of the 5 main churches of Hamburg, and to this day it's still the tallest building inside of the city. As you can see, it's under construction right now. They're just kind of refurbishing and restabilizing the spire itself. But you may also notice a different thing that kind of sets it apart from your normal church, and that it has no roof and it has no walls. Now, give that a moment there. Yeah, so the reason that it doesn't have a roof or walls is because in 1943, during World War II, the Allies conducted a bombing campaign against Hamburg, as well as later and around there to the rest of Germany. The one that targeted Hamburg was called Operation Gomorrah, and they used this building being the tallest building in Hamburg as kind of a central targeting port, which is part of the reason why this was struck so hard. Now, Operation Gomorrah was kind of a trial or a test for the Allies' bomber command. They used a lot of new techniques that had just been created. The whole thing lasted for about 1 week, with the Americans bombing during the day and the British bombing at night. And what they would do is they would first send in a smaller strike fleet, and these would drop metal, aluminum shards into the sky. What this would do is it would distract and ruin the German radar, so the anti-aircraft guns would be ineffectual when targeting the planes. These same planes would then come in and drop small bombs using this as its center point to start small fires. What this would allow is for the next wave of bombers to come in and be able to see these burning fires down below them and have an actual target during the night. So the next wave would come in and they would drop giant, massive explosive bombs called blockbusters, which would blow apart, as you can guess, effectively entire city blocks. Now, they didn't drop that many of these bombs, not enough to really damage the city. The whole point of it was to kind of burst open all these buildings and just strew rubble and effectively tinder all over the city. For the last wave of bombers to come in, they dropped a new type of weapon called phosphate bombs, which was this chemical phosphate inside of big clay pots. Now, when phosphate touches oxygen, it ignites and burns at a very high temperature. So they would drop these phosphate bombs onto Hamburg, which had kind of been churned up by the blockbusters, and start fires. They dropped enough of these to create such a massive fire that it started a phenomenon called a firestorm, which is something that had never really been seen at this point. Now, what would happen was this fire would start to build and build and build and start to burn so hot that it would suck in air from the surrounding areas, pull that air up as it burned, and then the air would go down out of the fire and sink down on the sides and get pulled back in, creating a massive vortex. This fire burned up to 800 degrees Celsius, with winds around the fire going up to 180 kilometers an hour. It's effectively hurricane-force winds. The winds blew so strong that people were literally sucked into the fire as they ran down the street and incinerated instantly in about 5 seconds to an object the size of my fist. Now, this was incredibly devastating to Hamburg, as you can imagine, and not only is this is just one night that I'm describing, and they did this for an entire week at the end of July in 1943. 40,000 people were killed, 37,000 injured, and 1 million people fled the city. About 250,000 homes were destroyed, and a large number of factories were also destroyed. And this is part of the reason why Hamburg was targeted initially, because the Allies knew that there was a lot of munitions factories. They were relatively successful in destroying these factories. The loss of life makes that relatively insignificant. Now, as I said, this was kind of a test for the Allies, and they took this success and they did it to other cities. They also tested it on Dresden, another city that was largely destroyed. And then they took this technique to Japan. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the devastation that was wrought here pales in comparison to what this did in Tokyo. Now, Hamburg is largely a brick stone city, so even though it burned incredibly hot and many people were killed, when you look at Tokyo, which is almost entirely a city made out of wood, you can imagine that it burned quite a bit hotter.
Wow.
They estimate about 100,000 people died in one night in Tokyo, which is more people that died from both atomic bombs being dropped. I always find it interesting that nobody really knows about that, and they only really know about the atomic bomb. Because the atomic bomb had other long-term effects, but it all kind of started here in Hamburg. After this bombing, somehow the spire of the church remained. And there's some really dramatic pictures of the city laid flat and bare and smoldering with only the church steeple standing up above it. Now, after the war, the people in the city of Hamburg decided to not rebuild this church, so it would kind of keep as a reminder of the devastation and destruction that war has brought. So they never put the walls up, they never put the ceiling back on, and they've kind of turned it into a bit of a memorial. There's several small memorials around here. I'd like in particular to point to the one that you are